Hey Neppers, it's me, Wild Neptune, and in this video, we're talking about artifacts. Before that though, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and catch me at Twitch, at twitch.tv/WildNeptune. So, currently, there are 82 5-star artifacts in the game. Some of them are extremely powerful. In fact, some units require certain artifacts to even be useful in content. In this video, we're not talking about those. We're talking about the 10 worst 5-star artifacts in the game. Keep in mind that this list is going to be primarily PvP focused, and that some artifacts will have niche uses in certain places, and that, well, the worse an artifact is, the more likely it probably also is to get buffed in the future, so sell with caution. Anyway, here we go. At number 10, we have Necro Undyne. This is a limited artifact that was around during the Guilty Gear collab with Dizzy. It is for mages, and at max level, it increases the caster's combat readiness by 20% when the caster uses an attack that targets all enemies. This means that the skill must say targets all enemies and can't simply be a single target attack that hits the only remaining enemy left on the enemy team. This effect is also not activated by a counterattack, dual attack, or extra attack. So this means that interesting interactions like Archdemon Shadow, Broman, Edda, maybe proc this off of their passives will not work. It also means that running things like Dizzy on counterattack will also not proc this artifact. In addition to that, currently in the meta, there are not that many mages that are actively using a lot of AoE. Never mind that the mage artifact slot is pretty stacked with things like Taghouse Ancient Book, Eli's Violin, Dignus Orb, and the list goes on. So, what could they do to make this artifact a little bit better? Well, to be clear, this is a limited artifact, so the chances of this being buffed is, well, non-existent basically, because not only is it a limited artifact, it is a limited collab artifact. So at the very least, we will have to wait to see if Guilty Gear gets rerun again. That said, the extra thing with not being activated by counterattack, dual attack, or extra attack is probably there for a pretty good reason. However, I can see maybe having a lesser effect if a counter dual extra attack happens, like maybe 5% CR boost. Or maybe giving the entire team a small CR boost like 5% every time a mage uses an AoE on their turn. That could also be a decent bonus to this artifact. In the 9th spot, it is Ancient Dragon's Legacy. This is Metallic's artifact for knights, and at max level, it will increase the crit chance of the user by 15%, and after the caster uses a non-attack skill, will grant them a crit hit damage buff for 2 turns. This can only be activated once every 2 turns. This is a buff which can be stripped off, but that's not why this is on the list. This is on the list because you have to use a non-attack skill to get the buff. And right now, there are not that many knights in the game that have a non-attack skill that care about, well, a crit hit damage buff. Charles and Ilyanov like critting the enemy, however, they don't have non-attack skills. Senya has a non-attack skill, and she likes doing damage, but she can't crit. Which leaves Mortellix by himself in this regard. And there are just better artifacts to use. What could they change about this artifact to make it better? To be honest, in a vacuum, this artifact actually is not that bad. It is just very bad because, well, almost nobody can use it right now effectively. The real thing is that we are waiting for a hero to come out that has a non-attack skill that's a knight that also gets an extra turn at the non-attack skill to get the bonus from this buff. Now, will a hero like this ever come out with this artifact in the game? I don't know. That might be pretty scary, but as soon as that happens, this artifact probably becomes best in slot for them. At number 8, we have Crown of Glory. This is a knight artifact that was on Tywin's banner, and it will increase the user's defense by 16%. And when the user is attacked by an attack that targets all allies, it will remove 5 souls from the enemy team. This artifact was created to try to curb all the soul burn shenanigans that was happening a little while ago. And the problem is that when somebody soul burns you, they use their souls already. So what are you removing? And the recent changes to soul burn, where soul burning a skill, you'll still get the souls for the skill, when before you did not, means that oftentimes, even if they had the soul burn with an AoE, they'll have souls again to, well, soul burn a second time with another unit. So effectively, this artifact does, well, nothing. In addition to that, it is the user who gets the defense boost, and the user is a knight, who is usually one of the tankier units on a team, and not any of the squishy support units that you might want to bring in. So, what could they change to make this artifact maybe a little bit better, while still keeping the flavor of it? Maybe if it said, enemy soul burns cost 5 more souls, it would be a lot better. Honestly, that might even be a little bit too good. But that is the kind of thing that would have to happen to make this artifact see any real play. In the 7th spot, it is Bloody Rose. This is Melissa's artifact. It's for mages, and it will increase the effectiveness of the user by 60% on single target attacks, and will have a 50% chance to inflict Vampiric Touch, which is basically Life Leech, on the target for 2 turns. And the Vampiric Touch part is not activated by counterattack, dual attack, or extra attack. At the moment, there are not that many mages that care enough about effectiveness on single target attacks, where they will really want this 60% effectiveness boost. A unit like Solitaria does have a single target attack on her S3 that has a stun that likes effectiveness. However, her S1 will AoE, and, well, this doesn't work on AoE. In addition to that, the other mages that want to debuff you, like Fairy Tail Tenebria, well, they have a lot of AoE. Spectre Tenebria has an S3 that likes to stun, but her S1 is not a single target attack. Now, what could they change to make this artifact, well, a little bit better? Honestly, one of the things they could do is boost up the chance that Vampiric Touch is at 100%. But also give a distinction where the Vampiric Touch can only be activated once every 2 turns. So you can't keep Vampiric Touching everybody on the enemy team and have a constant heal fest going on. Another thing they could do too is make it so that the first attack you do ignores effect resistance. One of the big issues with somebody like Melissa is that even though she can soul burn to ignore effect resistance, oftentimes she has to struggle with potentially missing the targets that she wants to hit, like a Remnant Violet or maybe an Arbiter Vildred or something like that too. We just talked about her a couple of minutes ago, and Edda's artifact, Twilight Calamity, is the 6th artifact on the list. What it will do is increase the crit hit chance of all allies by 10%, and the effectiveness of the caster by 30%. And this artifact skill effect can only apply to one hero within a team. To be fair, 30% effectiveness on an artifact is not that bad. It is just fairly underwhelming for other things that a mage artifact can do. The crit hit chance buff for all allies sounds good on paper, however, in reality, it is completely worthless in PvP, because you cannot actually guarantee you'll have the hero that uses this artifact on your team at all times, and because of that, you will still build all your DPS units to have as close as 100% crit as humanly possible. Now, what could they do to make this artifact maybe a little bit better? If the crit hit chance buff also had maybe an attack buff added to it, or maybe a crit hit damage buff slightly, maybe at a lesser number, it could be a little bit better. Honestly, it is hard to buff mage artifacts to be used outside of niche situations because of how strong things like Violin and Book are right now, but those are just some ideas. At number 5, it is Albustron. This is Kisei's artifact for thieves, and at max level, it will increase the user's effectiveness by 35%, and will give them a 50% chance to increase their speed for 1 turn at the end of the caster's turn. This is a speed buff, which means it can be stripped off, but to be honest, both the artifact's effects are pretty strong. A speed buff is very nice, and 35 effectiveness for all skills no matter what is also very good. So why is it on the list? Well, because it's a thief artifact, and there are not that many thieves that really care about effectiveness. Emerald Rin is one of them, and she is the queen of being 15%ed. In addition to that, the speed buff is kind of, well, almost wasted on her sometimes, as once she takes her first turn in a lot of her matches, well, her job is already done, and getting any extra turns is just a little bit of icing on the cake. I understand why they want to use this. Kisei's S3 likes effectiveness, and she maybe wants a speed buff in order to cycle through again and to get her S2 faster. However, thief artifacts like, well, Basket are simply much better, and time has proven, because of stealth, she doesn't really need the speed buff anyway. So what could they do to make this artifact a little bit better? Well, that's kind of hard, because, like I said, not many thieves in the game really care about either of these effects for the most part. The speed buff is nice, but they rather have something like, well, more damage. And simply adding a damage buff to this might not be enough. Maybe keeping flavor with the artifact, maybe something like when the caster attacks, have a random debuff chance too, like a Sierra Wren. But, like I said, this one is pretty hard. In 4th, it is a Little Queen's Huge Crown. This is Chloe's artifact for warriors, and at max level, it will increase the damage you do to the enemy by 32%. If the enemy is granted a barrier when the caster attacks with a single target attack. Now, it says granted a barrier, however, I believe it works where if the enemy simply has a barrier when you attack, you will get the damage increase. And 32% is a lot of extra damage. It is, in fact, I think the biggest damage boost you can get in the game from a thing that is not a skill. So, why is it on the list? Simply because of how hard it is to actually get the activation of the skill. An artifact like Portrait, which has a 20% damage increase, however, the only requirement is that the enemy is over half health, is leagues easier to do than this 32% for a barrier. Symbol of Unity only has 16%, however, that 16% is activated at all times. Symbol of Unity is one of the best artifacts in the game. A Little Queen's Huge Crown sees literally no usage. even in a world where multiple units have or give barriers that are meta, such as Fallen Cecilia, Carrot, Emilia, this artifact still, too many times, will actually do absolutely nothing for you in your matches. Now, what could they change to make this artifact a little bit better? Maybe if it had a small, say, 8% bonus damage on single target attacks when an enemy doesn't have a barrier, or maybe a small damage boost if an enemy simply has a buff, it could be a little bit better. Of course, these damage boosts will not be able to stack, but having it be a little more consistent would go a long way. At number 3, it is Knowledge Seed. This questionably shaped and named artifact is Politis for mages. At max level, upon receiving lethal damage, will grant all allies a random buff for 2 turns. And this buff can be increased attack, which can be greater, increased defense, increased evasion, immunity, or increased crit hit resistance. And this can only be activated once per a battle. This means that no shenanigans like reviving the enemy, reviving Politis, and, well, getting a buff after buff after buff. It also doesn't mean you can do things like SSA Hades Politis or another mage and simply, well, have it keep rocking. Because I do believe that technically units under immortality have actually taken lethal damage. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, which is why the distinction of, except for the caster, actually matters, because most of the time, the caster would be, well, dead when this happens. The real problem with this artifact is how random, and also kind of how lame the activation requirement is in having to, well, usually die to have it go off. The runner-up spot for the worst artifacts is Creation and Destruction. This is Lilibet's artifact for warriors, and it simply has a 20% chance, that is 1 in 5, for skill cooldowns to not occur after using a skill. Keep in mind, this is 1 in 5, and this is all it does. So, 1 out of 5 times, you might, well, have a humongous advantage. Now, this is simply skill cooldowns do not occur. It is not things like get an extra turn. You still have to, well, go again to use the skill again. You just, well, can use the skill twice in a row when you take your next turn. And that's it. That's all it does. This artifact is, well, very good for, say, a YouTube highlight. But it is not that good if you want consistency in your battles. Number 1. You all saw it coming. It is Samsara Prayer Beads. An artifact so bad that some people might say it's ass. This is Ken's artifact. It's for warriors. And at max level, it will give you a 40% chance to grant you increased ER and defense for 1 turn. These can proc separately, so you can get both, or either, or neither. And it is basically a defensive Alexa's Basket, which is a lot worse than it actually sounds. But why is it so bad? Because, to be honest, getting this buff at the end of your turn and kind of just sitting there and kind of doing nothing, well, doesn't do anything for you, because they can kind of just ignore you for a little bit. As a lot of heroes that would actually use this artifact, well, the player is probably not going to attack them anyway. Some heroes that might actually want this ER buff, like, say, martial artist Ken, well, he has to run Sacred Sight to even be remotely usable at all. Warriors like Kitty Clarissa and Meteor Calric that, well, like having ER because they want to cleanse buffs and not be debuffed, well, they need the ER right away. And they might run something like, say, Strat Gauntlet, which gives them a 60% bonus to ER at the start of the battle, as long as their HP is, well, above 50%. And they don't have to rely on some randomness of a 40% chance to get an ER buff, which honestly is not even that good to be used in battle. So those are the 10 artifacts that I see as the worst ones currently in Epic 7. Like any list, it is my opinion. You might have your own opinions. Are there artifacts that you think suck more than these? Maybe one of these artifacts you think is actually pretty good, and you have an interesting way of using it. If so, maybe tell me in the comments below. Anyway, it's been a good one. Nep out.